Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. I hope everybody's doing well. This video I'm going to discuss the Canon R5 and maximizing the image quality, sharpness, however you want to describe it, of the images that you get when using this camera. This video came to be really because of comments I'm getting from clients and people that have watched some of my other R5 related videos, and I've also been inundated basically online with R5 videos saying how great this camera is, and they're struggling a bit to get really sharp images, high quality images consistently with the R5. There are some things that you have to think about. You might have to change the way you shoot a little bit in order to maximize your sharp image output. Let's put it that way with the R5. So if you're interested in what I have to lend to this discussion, stay tuned. Okay, so the R5 and people coming to me and saying, hey, you know, online and on the phone and in every way, shape, or form, saying, I'm struggling with this camera. I had a 1DX2, I had a this, I had a that, and now I'm shooting the R5 because of your videos saying they're so great, because of lots of other people online saying they're so great, because my friend says it's great, all that kind of stuff. And I'm struggling to get sharp images, high quality images consistently with this camera. I'm going to start by saying the R5 is a different beast than any other camera I've ever shot. And I've shot just about every digital camera, and even going back to film days that Canon, you know, not really relevant anymore, that Canon ever produced. And I will say that this is the best Canon camera I've ever used in many respects, and you can watch some of my other videos and see why I think that. But it's also different. It's very different in a couple ways, at least. And it took me a little while, and I've been shooting this camera now for ever since it was available. I probably had one of the first ones that came out to the public. And it's a different, I've had to make some adjustments in how I shot, because I was kind of going along with that group there for a little while that thinks, man, this thing is difficult, you know, to get good images with. I'm struggling. For a little while, until I analyzed what was happening after the first couple shoots with this camera, yes, it is different. And so I want to talk about what I've done. And I am getting very, very good results with this camera. I'm getting just as many good images with this camera as I ever did with any other Canon camera. I'm getting just as many good images with this camera as I did with, say, my Sony A9 II that I was shooting prior to Canon coming out with their mirrorless. That kind of brought them up to the level of Sony. So that's what I want to discuss. I want to talk about, you know, the differences in this camera, maybe a change in your thought process that you have to make, and some different changes that you have to make and how you shoot under different scenarios with this camera and why. So here we go. So just to bring you up to speed here, the Canon R5, I'm shooting it principally, I'm a bird photographer, with my 600 f4 and the new Canon RF 100 to 500 with and without teleconverters. So that's what I'm doing, and it's nothing special or fancy, so there's really nothing that has to be changed, because or the reason why I'm getting what I consider, you know, high hit rates as far as sharpness and everything on my images and other people aren't, isn't because I'm using different lenses or something like that. These are very popular, and just about everybody is out there using similar type situations as far as the camera body and the lenses and teleconverters and things like that. So anyway, this is what I'm using now. let me broach, I think, one potential problem people are having with this camera as far as why they're not getting as many sharp images as they were used to getting, say, with the 1DX Mark II. I find a lot of the people that are contacting me are coming from a 1DX Mark II and coming to the R5, right? Well, there's a big difference, right? There's one principal difference between a 1DX2 and the R5 that makes, I think, a big difference in how you approach your photography and then your hit rate or your success rate as far as your proportion of sharp images that you're getting. And that's that the 1DX2 has a 20 megapixel sensor and the R5 has a 45 megapixel sensor. That is a big difference in resolution, and not only a big difference in resolution, but a big difference in pixel density on a full frame sensor, right? And that can affect your perception, anyway, of the sharpness of an individual image. Now, the 1DX2, because it was 20 megapixels on a full frame sensor, is what I would describe as a very forgiving camera when it comes to shooting action or even still static type shots. And that's because it has relatively low pixel density. So you can be shooting slower shutter speeds, you can be a little bit more sloppy with your panning and things like that, and you're still going to get home and you're going to look at your images 100% magnification, 1:1 on your monitor, and say, yeah, that's sharp, that's nice. And you get used to that after you've shot a 1DX2 or a 1DX or whatever for years. And then you come to the R5 and you shoot the exact same way, right? Muscle memory, and I've been shooting forever. Well, if this is the highest pixel density sensor you've ever used in a camera, you might find that you start looking at these images blown up again 100% to look for that eye to be tack sharp, right? And it's not as sharp. And you're saying, well, it should be sharper, it should be more detail and all that kind of, it's 45 megapixels more resolution. Yes, but it's about the pixel density, right? If you're shooting the same shutter speeds, let's say 1/1000th of a second or even 1/2000th of a second on a moving subject, and you're panning like you used to and things like that, it's just not the same because the pixels are closer together, there's more of them, and you're going to get what I call, and I've heard other people call, like smear across neighboring pixels, right? And when you look in then at 100% magnification, 1:1, things aren't going to look as sharp, right? And you're going to say, dang, what's going on here? Well, that's what's going on. And then if you would take that image, let's say, that 45 megapixel full frame image, full frame, no cropping yet, and you would downsample that, say, in Photoshop, right? I'm not talking about cropping, I'm talking about taking the whole image and downsampling it to 20 megapixels, like your 1DX2, right? I bet you look at that image, it's just as sharp as the 1DX2 image would have been. And it's because now with downsampling, you're combining pixels, you're not eliminating them, you're combining neighboring pixel, you're basically making it like you shot it with a 20 megapixel sensor, and that smear goes away, things get sharper. I've done it 100 times, and it does. That's what happens. If you miss a shot because of slow shutter speeds, you weren't panning quite right at the same speed with the bird or whatever, and but this focus was there and all that other stuff, right? We're just talking about motion blur here, right? Motion blur is what is creating this issue with soft images. If you do that, if you do the downsampling, you're going to find, wow, yeah, that's just as sharp as images I was seeing with my 1DX2. Now, that's really not what we want to be doing, though. We want to take full advantage of our 45 megapixels, the resolution, the number of pixels, the number of quality pixels on our subject, bird or an animal or something in this case. So what do you do then? What do you have to do? Well, you have to be a little bit better photographer, right? As far as panning accurately with the speed of your animal, your bird, a running fox, cheetah, whatever you're shooting. And also think about maybe shooting a little bit faster shutter speeds than you used to have to shoot at to get the same kind of sharpness, image quality that you were getting with, say, the 1DX2. Okay, so for example, I've been shooting belted kingfishers the last couple months. It's what I do in the wintertime. It's the tours I do. most of, and this is a bird diving. I track it down to the water and back up to the perch. Happens in about a second, right? Really fast. With my 1DX2 prior to the R5, I was shooting at, I could do that really well and get really high hit rates at 1/1000th of a second, 1/2500th of a second. You know, I started doing that same thing when I got the R5 with the Kingfisher. I'm going, oh, now wait a minute. Now I'm not getting as many sharp shots here. I upped my shutter speed to, you know, as high as I can get it, the highest ISO, you know, that I can feel comfortable with, wide open f4, a little bit more, maybe even 5.6 instead of 7.1 or 8, just to get my shutter speeds up to 1/4000th of a second, 1/5000th of a second, 1/8000th of a second in good light when it's bright sun and stuff like that, and my hit rates started just going through the roof, right? It's because, first of all, with a Kingfisher, it's hard to be accurate on your panning because, man, that thing's fast and small, and you're going down and up so fast, it's almost like just a muscle reaction. It's like a reflex, right? So it's hard to be really accurate. So this is kind of an extreme example for sure, but by upping my shutter speeds to at least 1/4000th of a second, if I can get there. If it's too cloudy, of course, you're not going to be able to get there. But if you can, boy, the hit rates just went way up, right? You know, the sharp images were 90+% if I got focus on the bird. And that's another subject we'll talk about in a minute. But anyway, yeah, and then the images, and then the resolution and the detail on the bird, and the just gorgeous images, right, coming out of this camera. And so, again, this is just the first thing that you want to start thinking about. A little bit different mentality, better technique overall, concentrate a little more on being steady, being good in your panning, and then think about shooting a little bit higher shutter speeds, okay? And I think that is going to help get you more sharp shots. That's one aspect. Another difference between this camera and the 1DX2 and other digital cameras by Canon is that this camera, for the first time, has IBIS, right? In-body image stabilization. It works in concert with the IS in lenses that have IS. This one, of course, the 100 to 500 has IS in it. My 600 f4 Mark II has IS in it. So now they're working in combination, right? You have 3 modes, mode 1, 2, and 3 on this lens, mode 1, 2, and 3 on this lens as far as IS. And you can control, and you do control the IBIS via the modes on the lens, right? There's really no control in the camera for that. This is different. This combination of IBIS and IS in the lens is different. You didn't have that with previous cameras by Canon. So if you're used to shooting in mode 1, mode 2, mode 3 for different scenarios, okay, mode 1 basically for static stuff, mode 2 for smooth panning situations, right, nothing abrupt, mode 3 for more abrupt things, but even mode 2, if you were doing like smooth and then woo, or, you know, kind of going up or down at the end like an owl. I always use barred owls as an example because they fly like that. They go like this and then they whoosh up, or they whoosh down at the end. So when you make that movement, right, with just the IS and the lenses, you could get away with that. And of course, that in combination with the lesser pixel densities, you'd still get sharp shots. It's a different situation now with IBIS and IS. The strength, the ability of this system now to correct for motion is so much more than what it was with just IS and the lenses, especially older lenses, right? So if you have the wrong IS setting, mode 1 when you're trying to pan with a bird or something like that, that's the extreme no-no, right? It's going to be trying, the system's going to be trying to compensate for any movement you make, and it's going to blur the image, it's going to make it soft or whatever. You're going to see some weird stuff if you try to do that. Mode 2 even, if you're doing something smooth, that's fine, but if anything happens at the end or during that smooth movement where you change axes of movement, it's going to try very much so to counteract that, and it's going to do a pretty good job of it, and it's going to smear the image, it's going to make it blurry or whatever, at least soft, right? Mode 3 even, there can be some stuff going on there, and there's 2 parameters in the camera now, in this camera, unlike 3 in past cameras, that you can change to tell the IS and IBIS kind of how to perform, right? You got tracking sensitivity, and you've got the accel decel, right? So anyway, you know, this makes a big difference and is a big difference from the older Canon cameras. And so what I am telling people, and they're getting back to me and saying, I think this is what made a difference, okay? It made a big difference for me. If you have enough shutter speed to shoot birds in flight or things that are bopping around in the bush, like 1/1000th of a second or higher, turn IS off. And I think you're going to find that a lot more of your action type shots with this camera are going to be what you would consider tack sharp, okay? I think this is something that is really messing up. It messed up me a little bit in the beginning, and I think it's messing up some other people. Mode 1 is unbelievably good at stabilizing any movement at all, especially if you use the newer RF lenses like this 100 to 500. I'm shooting static subjects, birds perched, for example, the kingfisher sitting on a perch, at 1/20th of a second on a tripod, but on a gimbal, right, because I'm tracking. As long as the bird is totally still and you shoot a burst, an electronic shutter, so now you got no shutter shock there, the IBIS and IS on mode 1, even on the 600 Mark II, I mean, 1/20th of a second, 1/10th of a second, getting sharp, tack sharp, okay? That just is an example of how powerful the image stabilization system is now with this camera. And if you have the wrong settings in that system, it's going to potentially cause some not sharp images for whatever reason, counteracting your movement, smearing the image, whatever. So think about that. Think about how you're using IS. You may have to think about using it a little bit differently than you have in the past with, say, a 1DX2, where you had just IS in the lens. Okay, that's the second thing. Now, the third has to do kind of with the autofocus. The autofocus system on this camera is really, really good. It's almost as good as the A9 II and the Sony in the sense of zone type autofocus. Now, zone is where you've got a bracket in the viewfinder and you get the bird or your animal in that bracket, you hit the autofocus on button or half press of the shutter, however you have it set up, and all of a sudden a bunch of little squares start flickering on your subject, you hope, right? And hopefully on the head or near the eye or whatever, and it's sharp when you shoot, right? And it tracks that. Wherever you keep that thing, that bird, that animal, whatever in that bracket of the zone, and it's going to focus on your subject. Or, and Canon's zone isn't quite as good in certain scenarios as Sony's in the A9 II. But then you have in this camera the eye detect, right? The face detect with eye detect on that, with tracking on top of that. Okay, so that's what you have in here. This is in the R5. Sorry, Sony people. I'm a Sony person. I'm not a Canon Sony person. I shoot the tool that I think will work best for me. Sony's eye detect with tracking and the A9 II and stuff just isn't that on the R5. It is amazing. It is really, really good, but it's not infallible. Okay, so here's where we go with autofocus. I think some people are shooting the zone and they're saying, yeah, I was on the bird, but you know, it's not going to pick the eye necessarily if you're shooting zone, right? Or even the breast of the bird that's in the same focal plane as the eye. Sometimes it'll grab the far wing, sometimes it'll grab the tail. So it's hard to control what part of the bird it's going to grab, especially if it's small in the frame. It just kind of flickers all over the bird. Well, yeah, I don't know exactly, you know, where it grabbed. And sometimes, even when it's close, the bird's really big in the frame, it's going to grab some part of the bird that isn't in the same focal plane as the eye, and the eye is going to be soft. But you look at the bird in your pictures, and some part of the bird is sharp. Well, that means the autofocus basically did its job. You're just letting the camera make the decision, you know, of where to focus, and it's not going to focus always on the eye. So then you say, okay, well then I'll go eye to face detect, eye detect with tracking, right? And now it should grab the eye. And you know what? 90% plus times, if the eye is on the bird is visible to the autofocus system, to the camera, however you want to put it, it will grab the eye. If it can't grab the eye, it'll find the head. Okay? If it can't find the eye or a head that it can discern, it'll grab the whole body, right? That's the kind of the hierarchical way I think this algorithm is built. And it works 90+% of the time. Now, sometimes it'll still grab the wrong part of the bird, quote unquote, to what you want, not the eye. But 90+% of the time, if the eye's there, it finds the eye and it stays on it, even on flying birds such as the kingfisher, something diving down and up that when I'm tracking, I can barely did I even get autofocus? But you look at it and the autofocus, if the eye was there, it found it most of the time. If not, it was the head. So it does a great job. But you got to understand that it's not infallible and that there's still other ways to use this camera with autofocus. You can drop back, just the center autofocus point, which I shot almost exclusively when I shot my 1DX. I didn't use the zone system on the 1DX2 because it just didn't work very well. Single autofocus point, maybe some in the center or toward the center, moved it around a little bit depending, or with the surround points, the assist points around it, was the way I shot with the 1DX2. You can still do that with the R5. If you want to take the camera's decision making out of the equation when it comes to autofocus, you can always fall back to that. We love the zone type stuff because it's getting so much better. We love the eye detect because, boy, especially when it's not an extreme situation like a diving kingfisher, if it's just a bird in a bush or whatever even, it'll find the eye 90+% of the time, and man, it makes your job so much easier as a photographer to get the focus exactly where you want it. So now we're saying, okay, that's what I want. That's why I got this camera. But it's also like the lazy person's way of doing things, right? It's like, and when it doesn't work, we tend to say, what's going on? This thing isn't working right. It is working right. It's just, it's a machine. So there's always stepping back to a single autofocus point, and now it's your job as a photographer to put that thing on the head, on the eye, on the breast, wherever you want focus. And you know what? Then almost, if you can do that, 100% of the time it's going to focus there, right? And you're going to get what you want. So I think it's a combination of the three things that I've talked about here. It's the pixel density, 45 megapixels versus 20 or even 18 if you go back to the original 1DX, and the fact that you just have to be a little bit better, right, at what you're doing with higher pixel densities to get the same sharpness in a full frame 45 megapixel image than you did with a 20 megapixel or an 18 megapixel. And then you've got the IBIS combination, which is different. And then you've got autofocus now for a lot of people shooting zone type autofocus, eye detect with tracking autofocus for the first time, where it really works. Before you had, digital SLRs, and for me, at least on the Canon cameras, they didn't work really well. You've got three major things that have changed, and now you're trying to adapt to that, right? So I guess my final thing that I want to say here is give yourself a chance. Give the camera a chance. Give yourself a chance to understand and adapt to these three pretty big changes, major changes between perhaps what you've used in the past, okay? And so, it's just, it took me a little while to analyze what was going on with my images and make some changes. But once I did, started getting really a lot of good sharp shots. And because you have 45 megapixels, if your bird or your animal or your subject in general is bigger in the frame, you're getting unbelievable detail. And if it happens to be a little bit further away, like you used to shoot with your 1DX2, you crop, a 20 megapixel full frame image, and you're down to, 3 megapixels or something like that. You're going, oh my gosh. Well, now you can crop, heck, just think about it. You can crop 50% of this image, of a full frame image coming from an R5, and still have more than what you had to start with full frame with a 1DX2 image. So it really is the camera I've been waiting for a long, long time. A camera that has the resolution for birds that we need as bird photographers, and also the speed of something like a 1DX2 where you can shoot 20 frames per second electronic shutter, 12 frames per second mechanical shutter. So now you're really not giving up anything with this camera, and it can produce a lot of really good images once you get used to shooting this camera. So give yourself a chance to adjust. Give the camera a chance to produce what it can produce. And I'll put a link to some galleries of a lot of different images I've shot with this camera, and different lens combinations and things like that, so that you can see what I'm getting with this camera. Some of them aren't going to, and I want to preface what I just said. You can go to these galleries and look at them. They're going to be on SmugMug. They're never as good when you go in and look at them on SmugMug or on Lightroom or whatever as they were when I'm looking at them on Photoshop when I get done with them on my computer. When you upload these things to these platforms, they just, if you don't have the proportions right, and a lot of mine are cropped to a custom composition, they just change the sharpness a bit. They downgrade the images, and so they're never going to look quite as good. Some of them will look really, really good. Some of them will look actually kind of bad, but they were all, I wouldn't put them up there unless I was trying to make a point, unless they're tack sharp and meet my criteria for a tack sharp image, which I think, I'll say it myself, is a pretty high standard. Okay, so anyway, kind of just keep that in mind when you're looking at images that I link to. Anyway, so I think I'll end there with this discussion. And in the discussion down below in the comments, we can continue talking about this, because I really want people to be able to use this camera as a tool and get out of it what it can produce, which is some really awesome imagery. So anyway, with that, get out there, take some awesome images, be safe, and I'll see you next time.